Welcome to Coast Creatives, a podcast for and about working professional artists within the entertainment industry. I'm Torrin Cavens Flores, and along with my co-host Joe Funk, we interview actors, directors, photographers, writers, and many, many more. In this episode, we'll be talking with Kristian Herrera, comic book creator and enthusiast. Kristian tells us about his comic book, Sidekick for Hire. He talks not only about where the idea came from and his inspirations as an artist, but also gives us an insight into the nitty-gritty business side of comic book creation. So buckle up for a dose of inspiration, and let's talk to Kristian Herrera.
Good afternoon, Kristian.
Hi.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you so much for stopping in today to talk everything comic books with us.
God, it's my pleasure. It's my favorite thing.
I was saying before you got here that this is not a field that Torrin or I are very knowledgeable in.
Yeah.
So we will have a lot of probably pretty frank, simple questions that will appeal to a lot of people listening.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I think, like I was saying before, that a lot of people ask me questions about it. And it's just something I wish I can talk more about. And you guys are giving me that chance. So I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Yeah. I'm excited about this. I reread the first two issues of Sidekick for Hire, and I'm so in.
Thanks, man.
It's so good.
I appreciate it.
No, I'm serious. It's awesome.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm gonna act humble for sure. I have to definitely talk my own stuff up, and I was like, yeah, no, of course it's good when I'm trying to sell it to people, but it does mean a lot. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, man.
Yeah.
Of course.
So this is where I want to start. On your website,
Okay.
it says, Kristian has a degree in business management, but decided to do what makes him happiest, make comic books. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that. Where did this love come from?
So honestly, I have a whole comic book origin story. That's usually how people ask whenever they're starting in comics. Mm-hmm. And mine was taken to a library with my grandmother, and I was looking around and I found Ultimate Spider-Man by a writer named Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley, and I fell in love with it. That was the first time I really understood what comics were. I feel like every kid knows who Spider-Man is, but they just don't know exactly how they knew. They just were born knowing who it is. It's like Batman too. But that was the thing that made me really love comics, because I was borrowing them from the library. I was reading them and I was loving them every second of it. I think it was the first time I really understood that comics are a thing, and I really think it's really awesome. But then, after we moved, I was back in Florida, and then when we moved to Georgia, I was 14, 15, and I was like, you know what? I want to go to an actual comic book store. And then that's when I started actually collecting comics, started doing Batman and Robin, Nightwing, mostly DC stuff. That was what I was getting really into after a little while. But that was in 2011, which was right at the same time Miles Morales started from the Into the Spider-Verse movie. Mm. And that was when he was first introduced. So I got really into that. And that was the Ultimate Spider-Man series too. I was like, okay, it was meant to be. And I started learning more about the writers and artists. I'm like, people are actually making this. This is really cool. And for the longest time, I never thought that I'd be the one to make them as well. It was, it'd be cool to share stories. I was a guy in high school who would bring the Walking Dead comics and share them with my friends and hey, you guys got to check this out. You got to read this. And it was so cool. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I can own my own comic book store. That was the original thought. So when I went to college, I obviously got a business management degree. I was like, you know, I want to learn more about the business side of everything, owning a comic book store. I interviewed a bunch of other stores, a bunch of owners, and a lot of them are these crotchety old men for the most part who've been in the business for years. So when you ask them, it's like, hey, what's the best advice you can give me when I'm starting my own comic book store? And they all say, don't do it. And I was like, wow, that's really, I was like, thanks. I really appreciate it. It's it's the hardest thing in the world, and you don't make that much money. And don't you guys like comics though? Isn't that the whole point?
Yeah.
And, I'm not saying I'll never open up a comic book store, but I was like, you know what? This market just doesn't seem as friendly, and just, which I understand is more of a competitive side of things. It was just not for me on that side.
You also didn't want to become cynical.
Yeah. That's the biggest
about
thing.
something you love. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then I started going to conventions. I think Dragon Con was my first one. I don't know if you guys ever been to Dragon Con.
Never.
It's a whole different thing. Dragon Con's a one-of-a-kind comic convention because it takes up like the whole downtown Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it's not in a convention center.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I met some of the creators there. I think one of the first ones I ever met was George Perez, who was a guy who created Cyborg, Nightwing, Raven, the Teen Titans as we know them, like from the big hit show in the early 2000s.
Yep.
And he was the nicest guy, and he was a big name guy. He was someone who's worked for DC and everything. And first time meeting him, I was like, hey, can you sign my book and all that? You know, being like scared nerd as I was.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, hey, you having a good day? I was like, yeah, it was awesome. And it's like, cool. And I was like, all right. And he signed it for free. And I was like, thank you so much. He's like, oh, thank you. And I was about to walk away. He's like, hey, do you want a picture together? And I was like, yeah, if that's all right. He's like, yeah, come here. And he was just the nicest guy.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is so cool. This is the kind of person that I want to be like. And I started meeting a few other creators and asking them questions, things like that. And I was like, oh, cool. They were just being super nice, super supportive. They were obviously talking about their books too, but they enjoy the human interaction. They enjoy talking to people that actually buy their books and read them, which I think is just super friendly and super nice. And that's always something I wanted to do. And I always had this story idea in the back of my head for Sidekick for Hire, because I was like, I'm a broke college student. Why aren't there any real superheroes? It's like, not only because it's stupid, but you have to be a millionaire to do it.
Yeah.
Because you can get hurt. Yeah.
It's stupid.
Yeah. You get hurt. That's a fact. But it was so, I think I was talking with one of my friends about it, and I was like, yeah, I think the most we could be is like a sidekick for hire. And that's not exactly in that word, but I was like, oh, that's kind of like stewed in my brain throughout college. And then halfway through college, once I was close to finishing up my degree, I was like, I'm gonna write this into a story. That's what I want to do. I want to make a comic. Because I was like, the more I was learning about business, I realized I didn't want to do an office job.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, my mom has done that. She's like, yeah, you get a lot of money and you're just there. I was like, this sounds just.
And you're just there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like, that's just boring. I want to do something fun. I want to do something that, I don't know, satisfies me creatively as well. So yeah, that's, after college, I actually sat down and started writing the script for Sidekick for Hire. And I never took a writing class. That was the other thing. I hated writing, like in high school and then beginning of college as well. But then I started to really like it once I started writing what I wanted to write.
Question.
Yeah.
About writing.
Yeah.
Because we come from the world of screenwriting, which has a very specific, unique structure.
Yes.
Which is different than prose. It's different than novels.
I've had to research all of them.
How do you structurally write for a comic book?
So, funny enough, there's a lot of similarities between like scripts for movies or TV shows with scripts for comics.
Okay.
The only big difference is that instead of like describing what's going to happen in the scene, is that you have to describe what happens in each panel.
Right.
And then make sure the dialogue all fits in it. So instead of being like, from what I've seen from movie scripts and my own research, is a lot of it's like, hey, this is a scene, and then it's just talking bullet points, or like, and then maybe like something specific happens and they change it up, or just moving around. But you kind of let sometimes the actors move with it and stuff like that. For comics, since it's standstill, you have to describe what happens in the scene, like specifically. Like, oh, hey, this is what happens. Sometimes you could do camera angles on there as well to help the artist to like kind of picture what you're doing. But you have to just make sure like this is a standstill moment between each one. So like a single page could be like 6 panels, and you have to describe what happens in each single panel and make sure it flows and makes sense.
Do you use the technique of do you draw any of them just like a crude, like this is kind of what I want to happen before you write out the description? Like you get that visual, or is it all in your head?
Yeah, it's mostly in my head. So there's structure with comics where you write the script, you do the thumbnails, which is just like the rough sketch, or I forget the name, how they do it in like animations, but they kind of show like the single scenes of like the ideas of it.
Yeah.
And then the artist looks at those thumbnails, or they do that themselves, and then they start making it more finer lines and pencils and ink, stuff like that. At first, when I was starting, I was like, oh, here's what I imagine this scene looks like and what I imagine this scene looks like. And I started doing like a rough sketch. And then I heard an interview with Mark Bagley, the guy who created Ultimate Spider-Man. He was like, yeah, a writer did that for me, and I told him to stop because that's my job. I was like, oh, I don't want to step on any toes with that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the creative side for the artist as well. Even though I'm coming to them with the story and generally the idea, if there's like a specific panel that I'm like, hey, this is what I exactly imagine, this is what I want, they're usually really receptive of it. But for the most part, I'm going to these artists because I like their style, and I want to see what their style is and what they imagine.
Okay.
I think one of the cool parts about comics too is that you can write a script and send it to 3 different artists, and it could be the same exact one, and every single comic will look different just because it's from their perspective of it as well. You can describe it as much detail as you want, but it's still going to be slight differences. So it's fantastic with that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do a lot of writers usually find one artist that they buddy up with for their career, or do they have multiple that they bounce in between?
It depends.
Like, are there duos?
Yes.
It's like the Coen brothers always work with Roger Deakins as their director of photography. Are there like famous duos in the comic book world?
There are. So, like the guys who created Teen Titans, that was George Perez and Marv Wolfman. They were working together for a long time. That was like back in like the 80s and even throughout the 90s and some in the 2000s. After a while, they'll split up and do other things because as a writer, it could take me maybe a month to write out a whole script for a single issue. That's just me personally. An artist, it could take them multiple months. So a writer can work with multiple people. An artist can only like work on one project at a time.
Right.
There's a current group or current duo named Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips that do like crime noir stuff. And they've been working together for like 20 years. And every single one of their books have just been banger after banger after banger.
Wow.
So, and it's not like superhero stuff. Like I said, it's just crime noir things.
Yeah.
And I listened to an interview with them, and Sean Phillips, basically the artist, he's like, it takes me a while to do it, but once I'm finished with it, I just email Ed Brubaker, and he's like, hey, when's the next script? I'm ready for it. Because he's like, I don't want to work with anyone else. I just like the way this structure is.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think every comic book creator kind of wants to do as well. They want to find that one person that like, hey, I want to work with this person for a long time.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to ask, is that something that you would like to do, or do you like this like you were saying, you can get so many different visions and versions from these illustrators?
Quick answer is like yes to both.
Okay.
Yeah, I think because there's definitely artists that I'm like, I really want to work with you, and I want to work with you a lot of times. But you're asking this one artist to kind of team up with you for years.
Yeah.
And like maybe they want to do their own stories, maybe they want to write some other stuff as well. And because of that, it's kind of hard to convince them unless they like really, really like your writing and really like your style, and you guys fit each other really well, like two puzzle pieces. There's definitely a few artists where I'm like, I want to work with you all the time. I'm not at the stage where I can constantly give them work at this stage because I'm still coming up in the business. I've only been in for 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard because a lot of times I make sure they get paid as well. Because like I said, it takes me like a minute to write a single sentence, or it could take me 5 minutes to write a panel. And that could take them multiple hours to do that. So there's a huge time disparity with that.
Yeah.
So because they have to do the thumbnails, they have to do the pencils, and they have to do the inking, and sometimes they have to do the coloring themselves too. And that just takes multiple hours.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure they appreciate that.
Yeah.
As an actor, I know I appreciated getting paid when I was starting out, you know?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who just take advantage of that. Like, oh, any actor will just do free work.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you know, I love it, but I also need
to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Do you get people who come up to you and ask like, oh, hey, if you do this, it's free publicity and stuff like that.
A lot of that,
Oh, yeah.
especially in the
Yeah.
beginning. A lot of that in the beginning.
Yeah,
Still some now. And like with
I get
Joe
people-
as well, like he's a photographer and he'll get like Instagram models being like, hey, you
Yep.
know, work with me, take shots. I'm not going to pay you, but it'll be good exposure
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
And Joe's like, no.
Within the film world, the key phrase is your payment will be in IMDb credit and meal. That's
Yeah.
what you hear a lot is like you'll get an IMDb credit, and when it's actors as well as crew people,
Yeah.
everyone knows IMDb. You go there and they just want to see like, okay, you've worked on a bunch of productions, so that's what
Especially
everybody's
starting out,
fighting
I guess.
for.
Yeah.
And you're getting paid for this stuff, and you're still so young. How old are you?
I'm 28.
You're still young.
Yes.
Compared to Joe and I.
Yeah.
Yeah, like especially we moved to LA in our early 20s, and it was a lot of like, okay, your 20s are going to be unpaid work.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of figuring that out, and you're already getting paid for it. And I also I want to commend you for like for you saying I want
Yeah.
the artist to get paid. I want
Yeah.
like the illustrator to get paid. That's a big deal too. Like when I do short films, that's my thing as well. It's like I don't want to. I've been that person that's been asked to work for free so many
Yeah.
times. I'm gonna do whatever I can to make sure that people are paid in more than just like I'm gonna get you a Jimmy John sub.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with, I think a lot of new writers too. They're like, oh, I have this script. Like, hey, let's work together and we could split the profits 50-50. Like I said, I've been doing this for 4 years. You're saying I do get paid, but I have yet to make a profit out of
Yeah.
anything because all that money I'm getting paid for like selling my comics and doing conventions and store signings and things like that. That's just paying me back for paying the artist,
Right.
or more money going into the next comic for me right now.
Right.
And it's just, I'm at a good place right now where it's almost funding itself to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's taken me 4 years to do that. And I don't think I'm going to hit a profit this year, but just fine. Like, it's like a new business. You don't
Yeah.
hit
Yeah.
within the first 5 years, you're not going to make a profit. So
Spend money to make money, as the
Exactly.
cliche goes,
Which is-
right? Which is true.
it sucks, but it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you consider your title on your website? I think it says you're a creator, a writer, and
Editor.
editor.
Yeah.
What do you consider yourself?
Mostly a writer, but that's the thing. Like with comics, it's not just like one job for me.
Yeah.
Because not only do I write the script, I have to find the team. I have to make sure they get paid. I also make sure it has to get published. I do crowdfunder work, well, like Kickstarters and things like that. So I have to promote that on there. So I'm a marketer as well as everything. It's when you're a writer in comics just starting out, especially like an indie comic or things like that, you're going to be wearing multiple hats doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
So it's,
The equivalent in our world is like a producer or a showrunner.
yes.
Someone like that.
Yeah.
But you're also the writer.
Yeah.
You're that. Oh,
The
man.
writer's the main thing I want to focus on. That's the thing that
Yes.
I'm trying to like, when I do get hired by other people, which I've started getting published work like last year from things like that have yet to get published, but like they've already paid me for things because comics take forever to make.
Yeah.
That's the other thing people don't realize. Like, it's not like, oh, 1 month, you're done. Cool. No, it bare minimum 9 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's from writing to art produced to coloring to lettering to formatting to printing, publishing, and then shipping and distributing.
And yeah, so you just mentioned a lot of different jobs, a lot of
Yeah.
different tasks. Break this down as if we know nothing, which we do not. There's that famous scene in Chasing Amy.
Okay.
Have you seen Chasing
Yes.
Amy? Okay. Where that guy they're at a comic book convention, and this was also like we have to point out that this was like a different time as well. What year were you born?
1994.
Yeah, this was
I think
around that
that's-
time.
That's
This
like
was,
when Chasing Amy came
yeah,
out.
I think it was right around 94, and I grew up in that time. And
That was Kevin Smith who made that movie, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
He's a big comic book fan.
And this was a time when comic books, conventions, and comic books were not as cool as they are now. It became cool in, I feel like, the early 2000s.
It started picking up. So it's funny because I got to experience both worlds where like I got bullied for liking the nerdy stuff.
Yeah.
But then my last 3 years of high school, people were like, "Oh, are those comics?" I love comics. Can I,
Yeah.
Can I read some too? I was like, I'm big into nerdy stuff, and so I got to see both sides of things.
Yeah.
Like,
Kids today,
dude, you stole my lunch money 2 years ago. Like, what?
Yeah.
you literally punched
Where
me in the
were you?
face, and now you want to borrow my comics?
Right. Yeah, it's a different world. And in this scene, this guy comes up to Jason Lee's character because he is the inker, I think is what he calls it. And the guy's saying, "No, you're a tracer." And he's insulting him because all he does is trace over Ben Affleck's illustrations that he draws. So watching that scene, I was like, there are so many different jobs involved with this. Break that down for us a little bit. Like, what are all of the specific jobs? I'm sure they can bleed into each other, but what are they?
Oh yeah. So obviously with the story, once you get the story idea, you need somebody to write it. So pretty simple. You write out for me, it's a lot of like outlining, expanding that outline, rewriting it, then actually writing the script. And then once the script gets like edited, because there's a writer and then there's an editor. I would highly recommend getting an editor, even if it's like someone who hasn't read comics. That's something I appreciate too. I get people who read comics to be my editor and people who don't read comics. Because I'm like, I want to make sure that if you've never read a comic before, you can understand this. So
Right.
That's
a
the
good
important
point.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah. So once that part's done, whenever the script is, for the most part, finished, it can go to the artist. The artist can be either the penciler and inker, or just penciler or inker.
Okay.
So here, let me run down. So the penciler part of it is usually the person who does like reads the script, kind of gets the idea, does like a rough sketch of everything.
Okay.
And then once like the editor and the writer kind of approves on it, then they'll start using like a more finer lines with it.
Got it.
With the pencils part. So it's like it looks nicer, you get a more of an image, because usually it's the thumbnail part is like stick figures. That's the best way to describe it.
Okay.
Then the pen
And the thumbnails, that's done typically by the writer or editor?
by the artist.
The artist.
Yeah,
Oh, who's not the pencil?
The penciler.
Okay, got it.
I forget most everyone's an artist, so it's kind of the thumbnails are done by the penciler.
Got it.
The reason why they do thumbnails is because they don't want to spend like hours working on this one page.
Right.
And then the writer and editor is like, oh, you kind of have to change this. You kind of have to change the camera shot.
That's what I was going to ask. So they create the thumbnails, and then they receive notes based off of those.
And it's like, that panel looks good. Maybe change that with these two people. Maybe just put one person in there. Because you have to think about, all right, do these panels look good? Do they make sense based off the script? Will the speech bubbles fit in there?
Yeah.
Now, that's like multiple stages ahead, but you have to think about that. So then once they get approved, the penciler will do like more fine lines of it. So you can actually see the image of it. Cool. You can actually see everything drawn and whatnot. And once that part is done, then an inker comes in. And if everything's been approved, they'll do permanent ink on it. So once that's done, it can't be changed.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So you basically get two different stages to change things up if you need to. But with an inker, once that's done, you can't really change it. So there's two different forms of comics, I should say. There's digital and traditional. So digital is easier to ink because you can change it up. Like, because it's all online using like iPad Pros or Procreate.
Procreate, yeah.
So you can change it on there because if you do a line, you can fix it.
Yeah.
For traditional, there's people who still use like bristleboard and use paper, and they'll draw it out and then they'll ink it on the paper. Once you ink it on the paper, you can't change it.
Are there
Seems like a really stressful job.
Are there artists coming up? Are there inkers coming up that are younger, that are your age, that are still doing the traditional style, or is it all moved to digital?
It's been mostly moved to digital. I'm sure there's still people doing traditional inking just because they like it. That feels more authentic.
I was going to say there are probably some purists out there. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But with digital, it's just become more convenient for people.
Yeah.
Like you still make great art, but it's cutting down the time.
Yeah.
And you don't accidentally like make a line on accident. And then you're like, well, now I have to restart this.
The equivalent for us, Joe, would be, the purists of filmmaking who still use film, which is basically no one now, but there are still some out there.
Yeah.
But digital, you can change stuff. You can shoot longer. It's less expensive. Yeah.
So most of the artists I work with are digital. there is an artist that I'm working with right now that I think he does inking traditionally. He like draws it digitally on pencil, and he's also the inker, but he does inking traditionally.
And
That's
then
kind of cool.
scans it in and colors?
Yep.
Okay.
So, which pros and cons to both sides of things. If you do it digitally, it's faster. It's like you get it, it's easier. If you make a mistake, you can easily fix it, but you don't have a physical version of it. Now, the reason why I say that's a con is because if you do it traditionally, you have a full comic book page that you just scanned and sent it, and now you have this physical thing. You could sell that for hundreds of dollars.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's artists right now from Marvel and DC who do traditional inking and traditional drawing, and they sell their pages for like thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Especially now in the collector market that happened, like started booming during the pandemic. That got big. That got real big.
Oh, that's interesting. That's something I didn't even think about.
Yeah.
It's a
I mean,
whole.
you gotta imagine, these people, these fanatics, they probably have like whole walls of just pages, like in frames and stuff.
Extra source of income from them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's like an extra thousands of dollars on top of getting paid for doing that.
And there really isn't a equivalent within the digital world.
There's the NFT things, and I put quotes around that because that's been a whole headache for a lot of like comic book artists who's just like, it's not working out for them. It's not doing. And I have my own opinions on NFTs, so I stay away from that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but no, there isn't really.
there's no digital version of that.
So
like you could print out the page and sell it as prints, but people aren't going to pay hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for it.
and leapfrogging off of that, how has the way that comic books are printed and distributed must be different as well? When we're talking about like people that have like the very first copy of Spider-Man or Superman or something, and it's worth millions and millions of dollars, versus now, it has to be drastically different.
To a certain degree. There's definitely like the older comics, like the first appearance of Spider-Man and which is like Amazing Fantasy number 14 and Superman, Action Comics, stuff like that. So yeah, you got those because those are worth a lot because there's so few in print and they're so long ago and it's like first appearance of these big name characters. Today, whenever you're printing out comics, you kind of have to decide how many you're going to print off in the beginning. So sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm going to print off 500 copies of it. That's actually a low print run for bigger companies. So with 500 copies, if it gets big, I think the biggest example I can use is there's a comic called Something is Killing the Children. It's from Boom Studios. It's made by a guy named James Tynan. And it's kind of started out as an indie comic, but it blew up so much that it's already getting auctioned off for movies and TV shows. And the first comic is worth like hundreds of dollars right now if you got the first copy, to like the point where they had to do like 5 reprints or 6, 7 reprints. So that's a lot.
Wow.
And I think they made like a few thousand of those.
Oh, wow.
But it's still worth a lot. So
And so when you're printing, do you have a numbering system for that very first, like, okay, these are the first 100, 200? Is every comic book numbered?
sometimes people do that in the beginning. I was stupid in the beginning is the best way to put it.
Okay.
I did not number. I know how many I printed. Like my first ever print run was 150 comics, just because this is my first time doing it. I don't know what it looks like. And so once I printed that and I sold all those and it looked good, I was like, okay, cool. And now the next time I printed even more. And there's like small differences that I could tell. Like here's a mistake that I made with my first comic because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to do a 5-issue series or just one. So for Sidekick for Hire, the very first prints of it don't have a number 1 on it. And so there's 150 copies of them without number 1.
Okay.
And that's how I know. To the point where I did a convention last weekend and somebody came up, he's like, hey, I found these comics at like an estate sale. Would you be able to sign them? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, yeah, I didn't know if this was the first comic or not. And I said, it actually is. It just doesn't have that on there. I just forgot to do that in the first part.
I have the version without a number on it.
Yeah.
So is that going to be worth
Ooh.
like millions?
I hope so. If it does, that means I could sell my comics worth that much. But yeah,
I will not sell.
We'll
my
be
copy.
vacuum sealing all of
yeah.
ours.
So like I can tell, like me personally, I could tell which ones are first print,
Right.
which ones are second print too. It's like there's small differences, but I didn't number them in there because I think the thing that I believed in at the time was I don't want necessarily this to be a collector's item. If it is, great. But the people who got the first comic, the people who supported me in the beginning, they have that. And if they want to sell it for lots of money later, they can do that because they supported me in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that's just like an extra special thing.
Yeah.
If it does blow up to that level.
So do you currently number your issues?
Not I know how many I'm printing off. I know
Okay.
based off because like I've sold almost I think over 1,000 copies of just issue 1.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it's awesome. But like I could tell which print run it is based off on the back, and that's kind of my secret to keep
Yeah.
right now. Because if somebody's like, "Hey, what print run is this?" I could tell them, but I'm just not gonna like.
I noted.
And if it blows up, this is also information that you could, I mean, we're saying it right now.
Yeah.
So someone could find this and listen to it and know, like, okay, this is how you find out. It's like when they had
Exactly.
the really expensive Beanie Babies were used with a different type of bean.
God.
Yeah.
So the weight is clearly different. It's like they didn't put that out there, but people figured it out and they're like, okay, this is how you really tell them apart and yada, yada, yada.
Exactly.
So it could still get to that point even if you don't put the number on it.
Well, yeah, exactly. I always tell people if they want to resell it, totally fine. If they make a lot of money from it, let me know so I know how much I can sell my own copies for.
I noticed that issue 2, the version I have at least, is numbered.
Yes.
Was issue 2 completely numbered?
They're all numbered,
Yeah?
yes. But
Okay.
issue 2, since issue 1 did so well, because I sold out of those like within like a few months, and for just starting out at comics, like I've done like smaller stories before, but that was my first real comic that I did together. I did really well for that, so I was like, you know what, I might as well make an issue 2, and I had the 5-issue planned out, because I always, the way I did Sidekick for Hire #1, it's like that's a good like one-shot comic if you just want to read like that. If you want to read more, I have more stories to it. So
Yeah, it is like the first issue is a good one-shot comic, sure, but I tell you, after reading it, I wanted more.
yeah, that's what I was hoping.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is now a good time to just get into Sidekick for Hire? Do we want to get into
Sure.
that now?
Yeah, let's do it.
So Sidekick for Hire,
Yeah.
this was you've had this idea since you were a kid, like back in high school, right?
College, high school,
College, high
around
school,
that time. Yeah,
sure.
right when like the superhero stuff was like really getting big.
Yeah.
Like right before the first Avengers movie. So
Oh, wow. Okay. A while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I won't say anything more. I'll just leave it to you.
Oh.
Tell us about Sidekick for Hire. I love it.
Yeah, I have a quick pitch for it that I always tell people at conventions. It's like if Robin was bad at his job. That's the best way to put it. It's more fun.
I
that way.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good.
If I get that laugh, that means okay, people are interested. Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, he gets hired by like millionaire vigilantes, like wannabe Batmans and Iron Mans, but he sucks at the job and gets the heroes hurt or worse, killed, accidentally usually. So
Yeah. I don't want to give away too much.
no,
of
the first issue's been out
Yeah.
for years, so I always tell people, feel free to give out as much information because
It's so great because I mean, there's a lot of superhero stuff out there, as we all know.
it's so
but
oversaturating the market.
It
too.
is, but this truly is a unique idea. It's a different spin on it entirely.
Yeah.
He's a college kid who doesn't have money, and this is how he makes his income.
Yep.
He gets hired by millionaire superheroes, and the book opens basically with him fucking it up.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, you said don't worry about giving stuff away.
Yeah.
So the superhero he's working with at the beginning of the issue, he gets him shot, basically. Yeah. And
From
the cool thing,
negligence.
though, out of negligence. He's
He
texting
didn't like
a
just
girl.
shoot himself.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so what he does, though, Leo
Yeah.
is the main character's name. He gets a gun and shoots the bad guy who shot the hero that he was
Yeah.
working with. And the cool thing about this is that he feels guilt for that, and that becomes part of the character.
Yeah.
And so it goes like deeper than just this surface superhero thing. And I loved that. I loved that. Yeah.
I was telling somebody about this last weekend where Sidekick for Hire, like people are like, oh, it's a superhero comic. When I first started writing it, that's how it came to be, where I wanted to make a superhero comic. I love superhero stuff, so I want to make my own. And like we said, it's oversaturating the market, both in like comics, movies, everywhere. You can't go one place without seeing something superhero related. So I was like, okay, how do I stick out? I'm like, maybe I make it about a sidekick. All right, cool. There's been a few sidekick stories. That's cool. It's like, all right, what else can I do to make it a little bit more like, what if he's just bad at his job? And as I was writing it more, I was like, okay, cool. And that was like the original idea was like the first issue, the big twist was the hero dies.
Like right at the beginning.
Yeah. But like that was when I originally wrote it, it was at the end. I had a whole different perspective of it. But then as I started talking to more creators and started talking to more writers and everything else and readers, I found out that from a business aspect too, people give comics about 10 pages before they decide if they want to keep reading or not. So that scene actually happens within the first 10 pages.
Yeah.
To make sure like, okay, stay in focus. Because then after that, the story jumps to the next day where he's talking to his friend kind of about the situation. Like right after the hero dies, it jumps to it. You're like, oh, what happened? How did he escape?
Yeah.
And I kind of have to like drag it. I wouldn't say drag because that's a bad word, but I have to stretch it out, kind of showing like what his life is outside of being a superhero. And then that's where I came up with the idea. Is like, okay, what is one thing a hero usually doesn't do is kill. I was like, what if he does kill? Which is like first time ever. What if he freaks out about it and stuff like that? Yeah. And so that was the reveal at the end. That was the hero dying was the secret shocking moment.
Yeah.
Or like it wasn't really a shocking moment. It was like it was supposed to make you believe it was.
Yeah.
But him actually killing somebody, that was the actual shocking moment. And we're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
How does he deal with that? And like throughout the next few issues, it just kind of shows him trying to talk himself up to be a hero and things like that.
He wants to be better.
Yes.
Like he doesn't want to get any of his other heroes like killed.
Yeah.
He wants to be better. And
he just
it's
sometimes he's just bad at his job, and that's unfortunately like the truth of it.
Yeah.
People are like, I want to be better, I just can't.
Yeah.
And so I always tell people, like, even though it looks like a superhero story, it's more a vigilante story.
Yeah.
He's
got like a makeshift costume.
Yeah.
And
that was the other thing. Like I said, I love superhero stuff, but I love making fun of it. Because if you look at Superman's outfit, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, it's cool, it's traditional now, but that's because it's been around for 100 years almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If somebody came out dressed up like that, I was like,
you're wearing your underwear outside of your pants.
Really dumb.
No,
so that was the other thing. So, and then the second issue, I have a new hero in there named Nightwolf, which I got that idea because somebody was like, "Yeah, you can't legally write Batman, but if you cut his ears off and call him something else, he could be Batman." I was like, I might do that.
Yeah.
So that's basically what I tell people.
Yeah.
He's like, it's pretty much a knockoff Batman. That's who everybody wants to be for the most part.
His costume is super cool too. Nightwolf is
it's more tactical.
That was a badass. Yeah.
That was the other thing when I was talking with the artist. He was like, okay, how do you think the costume should be? I'm like, he's fighting people. He wants to be Batman, but he also has to keep himself protected. So he has more tactical gear, like a vest, a helmet. It all just makes more sense with how he's fighting.
Yeah.
The guy in the first issue
just the one little eye mask.
The domino mask.
Yeah.
Which I love the domino mask. That was the big thing where I was like, I want to keep that in the comic. Regardless of what costume Leo wears throughout the whole series, he always wears a domino mask.
Yeah.
Just because that was pretty much his symbol. He gets different suits throughout the whole story, but the domino mask stays.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I have a question. When I was reading, I got so excited. So Leo has a friend at college, the only person he tells anything to, Jamie. He doesn't even tell his parents. And there's a scene where he goes to have dinner with his parents, and his mom is like a yoga mom, you know, like
that was the other thing. I wanted to make sure his parents were super supportive in it too.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want like bad parents.
No, she's super supportive and helps when she
Yeah.
like gives him food to take for the week, you know. And dad, like, you know, dad tells him he loves him at one point, which is really sweet. But he's like a mustachioed, like sweater vest guy.
Super normcore. That's the way I described it.
Normcore. I love that.
Yeah.
But they're sitting at the table, and there's on the back wall, there's like masks hanging and stuff. There's one mask in there, man. And I'm guessing that it was inspired by The Mask with Jim Carrey. It looks like the mask that he puts on.
There's like small things. So the artist Rick Alves, he's drawing all this. And I said, okay, because whenever I wrote it, I wrote the scenes. I'm like, okay, he's having dinner with his parents, and I kind of let him have free range with it. That's the best part. If you like an artist and you're a writer, let them have free range. There's a whole point
Go
for
for
that.
it. Yeah.
So there's like small things in there where he's like, oh, I like this. Let me do that. Let me draw that. So he put that in there himself. There's like small little Easter eggs, even just in the first issue. Like, I think the first panel, whenever you see the college that he's at and people are walking by, there's a character in there who just looks like Wolverine with glasses.
Oh my God.
There's that.
I gotta go back and look.
It's so funny. And then if you look at him walking out of his parents' house, that panel, that's the Full house.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. So it's small things like that where like we don't tell people. It was just something fun because I was like, I literally emailed him. He's like, hey, so what are you thinking about for the family and the house and stuff like that? I'm like, I want it to be the most supportive family. Like that was the other thing with the character. Like I didn't want a tragic backstory or anything for that. The tragic backstory is just the story for him.
Yeah.
But his family is supposed to be supportive and helpful, like a family that you want to be around. Like the Full House.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he was like, okay, cool. And then he came back. He's like, hey, I made the front of the house look like that. I was like, yeah, it's totally fine, man. Cool. I think he just changed like one number off of it.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Oh, that's so cool. I got to go back and look now.
Do you have any Easter eggs that you will not reveal? Where you're just kind of like, I'm hoping someone at a convention comes up to me and caught this.
There actually is something in the final issue that I put in there that I haven't told anyone about. And I'm kind of keeping close to the chest.
So, okay, I guess that leads to how many books do you have planned? How far is the story going? Do you already know, like, you know what the final issue is going to be? You know where we're ending up.
Yeah.
But do you know how many episodes it's going to take to get to that?
Yeah. This is the thing that I think a lot of like new creators have in their mind. They're like, I want to do my 50-issue magnum opus story for my first one.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not a very smart man all the time. So like my first like full-on comic, I was like, you know what? Let's make it a series. You really shouldn't do that if you're starting out in comics. You really should just do one comic. Because once you make the first comic, the next one will be easier. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be easier. But I decided to like, you know what? My first full comic book, it's going to be Sidekick for Hire. And I want to make it multiple issues. I was like, I have a 5-issue story arc in my head. That's what I want to do. And I was like, maybe I could do 15 issues. Maybe I could do 20 issues. By like issue 3, when I was finished with it, I was like, this is taking a long time. It's like, I'm still learning as I go and I still love it. But 5 issues is enough for this story. And when I ended the 5th issue, which I just like released like a couple weeks ago, it was the end ... Meaning it's the end of Sidekick for Hire. But if I ever want to come back to it later, I can. I had other ideas, other stories that I wanted to do. But as of right now, Rick wanted to work on other stuff as well. And I was like, 5 issues is perfect with things like that. It's the full story that people can get.
Right.
And it has a satisfying ending in superhero sense. Because I don't know if you, like, even in movies or comics or in books with, like, heroes, it always, like, it ends, ?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's like I said, I love superhero stuff. I love certain tropes that they do. So that's kind of what I wanted to do, but also give people a satisfying conclusion of this story.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So it is done.
it is done. Yeah. As of right now, I have no plans to make another few issues or another story arc of it. So
But I'm sure you have ideas of where it could go if the demand was ever there.
Yeah.
If you want to pick it back up again,
if a publisher
you have
contacted me and they were like, hey, we want to do this. Do you have any more? It sounded really well. I was like, yeah, I have ideas for days. So I have a little notebook that I keep with me. Is right now it's in the car, so it's probably not going to do me good right now. But it's just ideas I have for this story, for other stories, for everything. So
very cool.
Because like everyone's like, oh yeah, I got this idea in my head. You do need to write it down.
Yeah, no, I definitely find that you have to. You have to write that down.
Yeah. You will forget. Or you will not remember it the right way.
No, especially when you have so much other stuff going on in life. Yeah, write stuff down, people. If you take anything out of this episode,
write it down.
Write it down. But speaking of the writing, I'm curious as to when you write the dialogue for these, do you hear like the voices in your head? Do they sound like anybody in particular, or how's that work for you?
I guess the way that I would put it is that when I first started writing, when I sent it out to other people, editors and other friends who did it, they were like, okay, cool. Some of your characters are starting to sound the exact same. And as I start writing more, I'm getting better at it. But with the voices too, I guess the best way to put it is like whenever people like, oh, hey, Leo's like not that likable of a character. Sometimes the people have said that. So like there's certain things that I changed and like it was good criticism for me to learn that. But I also get a little personally attacked. I'm like, yeah, that's part of me.
Right.
Are you saying you don't like me? Well, that's rude.
How dare you?
Yeah. But yeah, so at first it was like just my voice for them. And with anything, as you like learn, you start realizing like, oh, you got to do different voices. You just can't do your own voice. Because one of the next books I'm working on right now with another artist it's this black female character. That was something else. I was like, I'm not a black female. So I can't that can't be my voice. That was the other thing.
Yeah.
And so I want to just do something different. As years went on, as I'm like writing more, I'm learning how to do different voices, making sure they don't sound a lot alike. Like I have this other comic, Prologue, that's a one-shot, but there's death in there. Like I'm not death, and I have to make sure they sound differently. I have to make sure whenever I'm writing it, it doesn't sound like the same person having a conversation with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't want to make them sound like Leo from Sidekick for Hire. So it's a lot of learning that as well, of like, okay, how would this person react? How would this person talk? Like in Prologue for Death, he doesn't talk in like can'ts or won'ts. He's like will not, cannot. Like that's how he talks. He does just so it sounds more godly, sounds more robotic kind of thing. So that was the one thing I had to focus on, or just generally how people react with each other. So it's still a learning process for me as well. I'm not saying I perfected it, but the more I write, I notice things I'm doing better now than I was doing before.
Very cool.
Yeah. And speaking of learning process, let's touch a little bit on the business side of this.
Cool. Yeah.
On how we go from this is an idea in my mind to I'm at conventions.
Yeah.
What do people have to think about if they're trying to get into this?
The biggest thing that I always tell people is that you have to be your biggest supporter. I know a lot of like really talented creators and artists that are like, yeah, that's a pretty good book. I was like, no, you have to say it's a really good book. You have to, if you're not excited about your own stuff, chances are other people won't be excited about it. So that's the way I go about it too. For conventions, let me start from the beginning. Once you start like making the comic, there's the steps. You make the comic, you sell the comic, and then you make another comic and you keep selling it. And just keep doing that over and over again. That's how you get a little bit better. Conventions are usually the best way to do it because you get mass amount of people who are your market, people who like that story. So whenever people come up to my table, I tell them like, yeah, this is like Kick-Ass, Teen Titans, Invincible. And people are like, okay, yeah, I love those stories. Let me flip through it. And then I give them the spiel. And I tell them how much fun it was for me to make, because it was, and that I just want people to really enjoy the story. And they're like, okay, well, you're excited for it. You got me excited for it. I'll get it. So that's kind of the thing. I do see certain people who are at like the convention table too, where they're just like really bummed out, just like, I'm not making enough money. I'm tired. But like, if you see someone like that, you're not going to want to buy something from them.
No.
Yeah.
You got to remember that it's a tough thing because conventions could go for like as short as like 3 to as long as 10 hours.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you're at your table, you got to be on. You got to be talking to people and be like, hey, how's it going? One of my friends who does like art prints, his name's Denzel. And he was like my first neighbor who was right next to me. And the very first con I did, I sat down just like, oh, hey, how's it going? Just talking to people. And he was standing up next to me. And he was just like, hey, how's it going, guys? Yeah, you having fun? Cool. And if they look at his stuff, he's like, yeah, go and check it out. If you have any questions, here I am. It's like, oh, like just making them feel more personal.
Engaging.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And I picked that up from him because that was the thing. When you're at conventions, if you see somebody doing a good idea, ask them questions about it and figure out like, okay, how do I do this? How do I do that? He gave me really good advice for my first day at the convention because I was like, maybe made like $30 at that first day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because like, that's the thing. Sometimes people have a hard time even making like $100 or anything like that. And I was like, I don't want to be one of those people who's like, yeah, I'm happy that I just sold one of my comics. I'm like, I am happy about that, but there has to be more.
Yeah.
I have to make sure that I can keep doing this. So that same very convention, because it was a 3-day one, the very next day I started doing what he did, which is like standing up, talking to people, getting really excited about my stuff, talking to them. That next day I made like $400.
Wow.
And it was just like that little bit of extra bit where people enjoy your energy. You're talking to them. You don't take things personally. Yeah. You don't take things personally. I mean, I usually have my fiance with me at conventions, so if I ever get frustrated, I'll just turn around and whisper to her what I want to say to them, and then I'm good.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, cool, that's cool. Because that's just retail.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just,
Oh,
like,
that's
you
a
can't
good
say that.
way to put it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. There has to be a performance aspect of this. You read any Dale Carnegie? Any?
I haven't.
How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'll give you my copy.
Yes, please do.
So you can check that out because it's a lot about small changes that you can make in your interactions with people to be more attractive, to have these people want to talk to you and be interested in your work. And it sounds like you always need somebody on the team that has that quality.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there are quite a few people in this sphere that are, I'm just a writer, I'm just an illustrator, and I'm an introverted person. I'm going to be at home drawing.
That's very true. There's a few artists who are just like, your art is so good, but the way you talk to people sucks.
Yeah.
So you need somebody else to talk it up for you. You need to just sit back there and start drawing, and then somebody else will be there. It's like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
Like, look at that. And then they're like, oh, I love your art. And you're like, oh, thank you so much. You don't have to do much for that. Like, I'm lucky because that was something like in high school, I was very like awkward and stuff like that. And then I started doing like wrestling a little bit. So I got to meet the jocks and stuff like that, but I'm still more friends with like the nerds in that group and things like that. And then latter years of high school, I started getting better at just talking with everyone and knowing social cues and stuff like that. I used to be like that awkward, introverted, nerdy kid too.
Yeah.
But I was like, I don't like feeling like this. So I started slowly changing it. And I'm still learning things. I'm like, I don't knock it out of the park every single time. But my day job's at Trader Joe's too. So I have to talk with customers all the time. I have to be on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's something that I used to be, when I was first starting out in comics, I used to be embarrassed to say like, yeah, I work at Trader Joe's at my day job. But now I'm like, no, that's not something to be embarrassed about because I'm technically doing 2 full-time jobs at once.
Yeah.
So like that should be something like I told somebody else that and they were like, oh man, I work at Publix right now and I want to make comics. I didn't know I could do both. I was like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I got over. I'm like, I'm not embarrassed to say that anymore because they've been helping me. They've been supporting me. Like,
and you can be an inspiration to people that want to do that same thing. A lot of people think, this has to be my full-time passion. It's like, well, you can't just jump from one to another, especially the way that you're describing it. You have to have these funds available at the beginning where you're saying, well, I want my illustrator to be paid. I got to make sure to have my vision come alive. I'm not going to make a profit for a little while. So you need other jobs, and you also probably need some sort of crowdfunding sort of. What is your experience with fundraising and raising money for your product?
So I've actually done 4 Kickstarters for all my Sidekick for Hire. The first one was completely self-funded. I made sure to save up enough money and do all that. That was like one of the first things I wanted to make sure because the whole idea of being a starving artist did not amuse me. because I don't want to starve. I like food too much.
I love food
Yes,
too.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing. I know a few people are like, oh, you got to go full into it. I'm like, I have responsibilities in life. I'm 100% committed to the comic book stuff, but I got to make sure I am able to support myself and able to do all that and support the love of my life and our house and everything else. So that's why I did that. But once I had enough money and I paid for the first issue and I started getting some eyes on it and some interest and some readers and fans and things like that, I looked into Kickstarter or different types of crowdfunder. Kickstarter is kind of like the biggest one. So I was like, okay, that's going to get more eyes on my stuff. Funny story about that, though. The first time I ever launched a Kickstarter, I launched it and I was like, $5,000 was going to be my goal, which is way too high for someone starting out. And then 2 weeks into the Kickstarter, because it was supposed to be 30 days, the pandemic started.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And I was like, oh, I'm learning from my experience. And my only saving grace, my only two saving grace was that they extended another week because it was the first time the world has experienced something like this for a long time in this day and age. So they extended another week. They gave me another week to kind of get to my goal. And then everyone got their stimulus checks. And so I had a lot of people who were like, hey, we want to support you. Here's a few extra dollars and stuff like that. So I made my goal barely.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, cool. But yeah, after that, I started figuring out how to ship it and stuff like that. And once I figured all that out, a lot of this job is me figuring out how to do it on the job. That's a lot of comics. There's some how-to guides, but there's nothing all-inclusive. There's not like step-by-steps. So for the next one, I lowered my goal to like 3,000. I was like, for the next issue. And I hit that goal, no problem, and also got even closer to $5,000. I was like 4,000 something. I was like, okay, cool. But I kept it at that much because that's technically all I really needed for printing costs and partially paying the artist. I was still paying out of my own pocket to make sure the artists get paid enough and everything. But when I sell comics, all that money that I make from selling the comics just goes back into making the next one.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it all worked out for me. And then even with my last one, I hit my goal like early on in my Kickstarter. And so far, this one was, I think, right below $5,000. But then some other people were like, hey, I missed out on it. Can I get it? And then I got like an extra few $100s. So altogether it was over $5,000 again.
Nice.
So it was a weird like going up, down, and then back up, which is very rare in comics.
Yeah.
So that's how I've been using kind of Kickstarter to kind of help reach to a wider audience, kind of know who is interested, how many people are coming back, and things like that.
Yeah.
So I get about like 200 backers on average. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some of those backers that are consistent every time, but the new people coming on board, who are the new people? Is this new people you're reaching on socials? Is it people you reach at conventions?
Yeah, it's both. I think because I'm getting better at social media as well. Like that's the other thing. Marketing, I have to do it all myself.
Yeah.
I'm the one who posts my thing on Instagram, on Twitter, and all that stuff. And then I do get like return customers who are like, hey, I really like the last few issues. I want to get the next one.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. And then I get people who are like, hey, I've seen it before. I didn't back it because I didn't really know who you were. But now that I know you're still doing it and you're credible, because that's the other thing with Kickstarter. Sometimes people make the comics, they get funded, and then they don't ship out a product and people can't get refunds on it.
Yeah.
So, and that looks bad on everyone. And I never wanted to be that person.
Yeah.
Even if it's going to cost me a little something extra, because printing costs and paper costs went up. Even if it costs me a little extra, I want to make sure everyone gets their products.
Yeah.
You supported me in something, so it's the very least I can do. But yeah, and then with conventions, since I started doing that at the end of 2021, I think, because that's when they started opening up. I started interacting with more people. They bought some of the issues there, and they're like, I want to get the next one. I was like, well, my Kickstarter is going to be launching next year, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's how I got even more people with that.
So you're learning the artistic side, you're learning the business side, and you've just completed your first series run.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to improve on moving forward?
Everything. I know that's just a generic answer, but I'm still learning how things go and stuff like that. Like my writing alone, I'm still want to get better. I know I'm not at the level that I want to be at, but I know I'm better than I was day one.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Getting better. I know my stuff is good, but I want to be great. I want to just reach that high point with like writers like Brian K. Vaughan, the guy who wrote Why the Last Man and Saga, which are like the two biggest comics, the indie comics in the last few years. Robert Kirkman, who wrote Walking Dead and Invincible. I want to get to that level.
Okay.
If not more.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, you can be the next Stan Lee. It's like, that's cool. I don't want to be the next Stan Lee. I want to be the first me. That's the thing. I want to get better. Like, will I ever hit that goal? Maybe not, but it's fun to achieve or try to achieve it.
Yeah.
And then as I keep going, I'm learning more of the business aspect. I'm meeting more artists. I'm meeting more friends, people who know me on social media. But like recently what I did too, because this is something that not a lot of people know about, is that with single issues, people like them, but they don't look good on shelves. Like unless you put them flat, but there's only so much space. That's why people like hardcovers or soft paperbacks. I made a box set for my last Kickstarter where people bought the comic, they can get a whole box set that all the comics sit comfortably in, the single issues, and it looks good on the shelf. That was something that I think only a few companies did before, and it was like, oh, it's not really working out. But I got enough interest in it. I brought a few to my last convention. I sold out within the first day.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was trying out new things, trying out something different. I don't want to just keep making the same style comics all the time, but I want to do something different. Like you got online comics. People are doing that. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah.
A lot of money into that as well for people. And there's still so much people can do. I think it's like same thing with like film. Like you get short films, you get TV, you got movies, you got streaming. It's all that stuff. And people are still making new things and new ideas.
And I think the people that are succeeding right now are those that are receptive to how everything is shifting and changing, and that's how it's going to be moving forward.
Things always change. That's how things get better.
Yeah. It's also got to be really encouraging that we now live in a time where you're talking about the oversaturation of the superhero market. It's got to be really encouraging that it is so oversaturated that we're getting a lot of comic book stories that people don't know. They're going to keep bringing up Superman and Batman and Spider-Man forever.
Everyone knows who they are.
But when James Gunn took on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, I had no idea who the Guardians of the Galaxy were.
Hardly anyone did.
Yeah.
That wasn't even the original incarnation. That was the one that was like made I think like 8 years before.
Yeah. And he's now heading the new DC universe, and I was looking at all of the projects that were coming out, and I didn't know who any of these were. And it's got to be really great as an artist where you're like, okay, awesome. We're always going to have Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, but there's now these stories of these smaller characters that can be told, like amazing stories that we can put out there. Yeah. Would you, is that a goal of yours? Is it something that you would like to happen to have a screen version of this work of Sidekick?
Yes, but I always put a caveat on it. So there's a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot, there's a few people who specifically go into making comics thinking that, oh, it's going to get picked up as a show or a movie and it's got to be made into a comic first. The comic book readers sniff that out really quickly and they're like, okay. And it's kind of disrespectful to my medium, because you're like, oh, you're using comics as a stepping stone. And then like, if you're going to make a comic, you're going to make it because you love it. Like if somebody wanted to pick up Sidekick for hire and make it a TV show or movie, I'll be okay with that. I'm not going to say no to that at all. That'd be awesome.
Right.
But that wasn't my goal with making the comic. My goal was to make a comic. Yeah. That should be it. Like someone who's like, oh, I wanted to make this TV show or movie in the hopes that they can make it into a book series that I could just write.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, you're kind of just disrespecting movies and TV shows, thinking that's just a stepping stone. I know it doesn't really work the exact same because movies and TV shows are so big, but yeah, you see what I mean with that?
Yeah,
would
definitely.
You, if there ever was an adaptation, would you like it to be something that's based off of your work, or would you like something that, I'm not going to say shot by shot, but you know, is it Frank Miller 300?
Yeah.
That movie, that was pretty much like the comic book, the graphic novel was the storyboard essentially that they used, and they not stole. They had permission.
With permission.
But
Watchmen's a different story.
People were looking at 300 and like, oh my gosh, Zack Snyder is such a genius. I was like, yeah, but it's the comic book artist that came up with these frames.
Yeah.
Would you like it to be very closely based on what you create, or would you like them to say, okay, we really like this concept, we're going to use the name, we're going to use the characters, but we're going off on our own story with it?
I would like, because somebody asked me that. It's like, what if somebody approached you, is like, hey, we want to make this into a movie and TV show? I was like, that's fine. They're like, we want to change it up a little bit. I'm like, that's quite all right, because that's something else I want to try out as well, is writing scripts for like movies and TV shows, because that's something haven't really done before. I've done like prose and things like that, but I think what I would want is like, I want to be part of that. I want to see, like, you don't have to go scene for scene for the comic, but I just want to see, I want to help write it so it kind of stays somewhat true, but I also think a different perspective would be better. There's things that I'm looking back at issue 1, like, I love the way I did it, but there's things I definitely could have changed. So
sure. And I think it all depends on who the artists are. And that's going to affect if the integrity of the original product is upheld, you know?
Yeah.
But like with The Last of Us, they wanted to maintain the integrity of the game.
There's scenes for scenes from The Last of Us, from the video game that they did
we
so well.
played the game while watching the show.
Okay, cool.
And so you notice that. And the world they build is like exactly like the game, and it's beautiful. They changed things that were necessary,
And
you know,
for the better, in my opinion.
for the better. And then they expanded story, you know, because it's not a game, it's a show.
Yeah.
So there has to be some kind of like deeper narrative. And it's amazing. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Well, that's the thing. I feel Neil Druckerman, the guy who wrote the original story for Last of Us in the game, his story was fantastic. It's amazing. But there's certain things that they did in the TV show where even he said, that's way better. Like, the best example is the episode where you see Henry and Sam, the brother duo. It was like a father and son duo in the video game.
Yep.
And then I was like, okay, they're brothers. Like, all right, that's cool. He's like, oh, also Sam is deaf, so he's even more dependent on him. Like, that's such a smart idea. That's so
cool.
And it's like, it's that added extra bit. And I was talking with other people at the end of the episode, because spoilers for it, he churns.
Yeah.
Right? And he doesn't attack Ellie until Ellie moves him. That's because as a clicker or as a zombie, he's deaf still. So that was the other thing that a lot of people didn't realize in it. I was like, they didn't explain it. That was just a nice little touch where she was just looked at it. He was like, oh, he's fine. He hasn't attacked me in return. And then it's like, no, he did. He's just still deaf. I was just thinking,
so good.
But it's like, you need that other perspective. You need that editor. You need somebody to read over. It's like, hey, what if you did this? What if you did that? And that's something that I've gotten better at as well, where I'm like, hey, I want to send this to other people. I want to get your opinions on it. Because the first time I sent out Prolong to somebody else, they were like, oh yeah, this is really good. I'm like, cool. That doesn't help me. Tell me what I can do better. Roast me if you have to. Hurt my feelings. I don't care. That's the only way I'm going to get better. And like when I meet other professionals who work for like Marvel and DC and all the other publishing companies, they're like, oh yeah, it's really good. I'm like, you can tell me what you really think. That's the only way I'm getting better. And they're like,
yeah,
are you sure? Because people get offended. I'm like, no, this is the only way I'm going to get better. And so that's the stuff that I look for. That's the stuff that I, for lack of a better word, crave.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people should. If you're going to continue in comics or any creative medium, you got to look for constructive criticism for people. With that being said, randos on the internet saying, this comic sucks. I was like, it doesn't really help.
Yeah, that doesn't help either.
Yeah,
you
but
know,
like,
this is great and this sucks. Same ballpark. It's like they don't help. Yeah, there's a difference between constructive criticism and then trolls.
Yes.
You know. But I mean, that's the thing as an artist. We never stop learning. We have to always be willing to learn and check our ego at the door. And it's really hard sometimes. Yep. Oh, 100%. You know? Because you're like, what I just did.
I worked so hard on this.
For me, is like what I just did on stage or on camera was amazing, in my opinion. You know, but it's like, yeah, gotta check that ego, and it's hard sometimes.
It's hard, especially when you are devoting years into a product like you are, at the end of that, you kind of just want to hear the good stuff.
Yeah.
You want to just be like, just tell me what you liked about it.
Which is nice to hear. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
There's a comic book author who's like gets published, and he's an editor for DC and whatnot. But he's been helping me out, and I consider him my friend. And he read all of Sidekick for Hire, and he was like, "Yeah, it's good." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "I'm gonna give you." He's like, "I'm gonna give you my actual opinion on everything too, things that you could have changed and stuff like that." I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And he just went down a whole list of things that like you should have done this differently. This could have been done differently. A little redundant here, and I was like, "Okay, this would have helped so much early on." But like,
That's
I was
a
also
really big list, man.
It really was, but like, that's what I was asking for. That's what I wanted. And like, there's a part of me that gets a little bit hurt. I'm like, I just spent 4 years on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, for the next story, I know what to do better. I know how to structure the story differently. I know how to not make it traditional and things like that. I know you haven't read it, but like my other comic Prologue that I did, because that's a one shot. I was something that I just tried out something differently. It's a 20-page story for that one. But once I made it, I had a few other people read it, and people were like, "This is really beautiful." Like, to the point where, as of right now, 28 people have cried while reading it.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's going to be 29 when I read it. I bet
You have to let me know, though. That's
I will.
thing.
I will.
But, like, everyone's like, "How do you know?" It's like, people tell me in person. People message me. I have emails showing that people actually said, "Yeah, I cried while reading it." So, and I use that to kind of promote it as well.
I'm
and
excited now.
Everyone's like, "This is a beautiful story," because it's about death, not wanting to say goodbye to someone they really care about. And another professional, he's like read it. He's like, "This is really good." And I was like, "Oh, thanks. Any like things that you have, any notes or anything?" He was like, "No, not really." And it's like, "It's really good." I'm like, "Okay, that doesn't really help me now." And then this other guy I made friends with, his name's Alex. He's been in the comic book industry for a while, and he called me. He literally did the exact thing that I wanted, where he called me. He's like, "Hey, Kristian." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hey, I read Prologue. It's good. So here's things that you should have done differently, though." I was like, "Okay." And it was like a 30-minute talk.
Oh, wow.
He was like, and besides at the very beginning just saying it was really good, everything else was just constructive criticism. And you don't get that a lot. And we built up a good enough relationship where he knew that's exactly what I wanted. So he didn't hold back, which is something I appreciate. There's people that I know who will give me ideas and story ideas, and I like give them constructive criticism. Like, no, you don't understand. I was like, I'm just letting you know from my perspective. You get defensive, people aren't going to want to share their opinions or not going to want to help you.
Right.
So that's the other thing that I tell newer creators who come up to my table is like, "Oh, I have this idea," and then they tell me it all. I'm like, "Okay, do you want notes back on it, or you just telling me just for fun?"
That actually leads into probably the final thing we'll talk about here. We like to end every episode with, if you could give a piece of advice to someone just starting out, someone who's on the fence, they're worried about it, they're worried about the money, they're worried about their ideas, are they good enough?
Yeah.
Could you sum up just one piece of advice that you'd like to give to people that are thinking about getting into this work?
God, I mean, the biggest one, and this is the advice that I got when I first started, because when I first started writing everything, I was like, "Okay, cool, I have the script ready. When is Marvel and DC or anyone going to knock on my door?" And just like, I have something ready, I have a script. No one's going to look at that. No one cares that you can write, because everyone can write. Writers are a dime a dozen. It's like, "Okay, I could draw too." It's like, "Cool. Have you drawn a comic yet?" It's like, "Well, I have like these sample pages," or anything. That does not look good. So the biggest piece of advice I have, and it annoys people so much, is to make a comic. That's the whole thing. Like, it's easier said than done, 100%. But if you want to make a comic, if you want to break into comics, you have to make one. And there's people who can give you advice, but you have to actually start it.
Yeah.
It's like your guys' podcast. Like, people can give you advice every day, every night about it. And you're like, looking for it. It's like, "Okay, how do you start it? Okay, how do you publish it?" It's like, cool. They can give you advice. But if you want to start a podcast, you just have to start one.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
You got to take that first step.
Exactly. So that was the whole idea. Even if it's just like an 8-page comic, it's a 20-page comic, 24-page. Also keep it at 4 pages, because that's how comics are printed.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that a lot of people don't realize too.
Oh.
Yeah. So if it's by
didn't know that.
4s. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So small thing like that. That's just something else I tell people.
Yeah.
But start with one story. Don't start with your magnum opus. When people are like telling me their ideas as well, I stop them like halfway through telling me. I was like, how long is it? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, how many issues do you have planned? They're like, I can probably bring it down to 20. I'm like, yeah, bring it down to 1. Start with 1. Don't start with your 20 or 10, because especially for self-published stuff, that takes forever. And that's a lot of money that you're spending yourself.
Yeah.
So start with 1, see how it is. That way you know. And then after that, work on your next thing. If you want to make it multiple issues, do it. But after the first one, you know how to make a comic. You generally know how much it costs. So.
Oh, I love that. That's really a wonderful advice.
Solid
It's
advice.
been so wonderful talking with you.
That's my pleasure, guys.
With all of this, a lot of great information here. Where can people find out more about your work?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at YesThatChristian. You can say it in like an exhausted tone, like, yes, that Christian. So it's more fun.
Yes, that Christian.
Yeah. And it's Christian with a K, not a CH.
Go ahead and just spell that.
It is
just so everybody knows.
Kristian, Kristian. So.
Yes, that Christian.
Yes, that Christian.
You said that's Instagram and Twitter?
Yeah, both of the
Do you have a favorite? If people wanted to send you a message?
I'm on both.
Okay.
I know Twitter's been weird.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. But yeah, I keep my messages open. I have my website at KristianHerrera.com. You can get through my website, through my social medias as well. And then it has my emails on there.
Amazing.
I always tell people, like, if you have any questions or anything about it, please message me. Please email me. I'll help any way I can, because that's something I appreciate about the comic book community. Is like 99% of the people are so supportive. They're like, if you want to make comics, we want to make sure you know how to, and we can help you any way we can. We're not going to do it for you, but we're going to give you the advice, give you some tools, make sure you don't make the same mistakes about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a great part about it. So, and it's a small community, so don't be a jerk to people.
Yeah.
Word will travel real fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, again, thank you so much for being here, for talking with us about all of this. Really wonderful information. I'm sure people are going to be hitting you up and asking you questions. And thank you for being transparent and helpful and wanting to provide this information and not just being a gatekeeper.
No. That doesn't help anybody. I think the more comics and the more people want to create, the better it gets for everyone.
Yeah.
Just because you get more ideas, more stories.
Yeah.
So
I can't wait to see what's next for you and what you come out with next.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to read. I am 100% in. So yeah. Yeah.
Send
and
us
I
those
know that
Kickstarters,
that's not constructive criticism or anything, but F it. I'm in.
Thank you, man. I still like the compliments. Please still keep giving me compliments.
Will do. All right, buddy. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys.